I grew up surrounded by the tales of the wilderness, the kind that filled campfire nights with a mix of awe and unease. Raised on a reservation in the 1960s, my name is Nathaniel Tall Trees, a name that feels like it was destined for the forests. As life would have it, I found myself working in forestry, running a small crew contracted to clear old-growth timber deep in the Olympic Peninsula, Washington. It was grueling work, thick, ancient trees, uneven terrain, and the kind of isolation that made you second-guess every rustle of leaves. But the pay was decent, and the air was clean, a trade-off we were willing to accept. Our work demanded stamina, patience, and the ability to navigate a land that seemed older than time itself. The forests here weren't just landscapes. They were realms ancient and unyielding, carrying a presence that even the toughest men couldn't deny. By the time we arrived, the forest's damp air clung to our skin, and the sheer density of the trees muted every sound. Days blurred together, waking up to the chorus of birds, sweating through the labor of felling giants, and collapsing into worn-out cots at night. My crew was small but experienced. Hank, our burly foreman with a voice like gravel. Carl, always joking to keep the mood light. Jerry, quiet but dependable. And me, the one who often found myself staring a bit too long into the shadows between the trees. This wasn't my first logging job, but something about this place felt different, as if the forest itself was alive and observing us. We'd been at the site for a week when things started to feel wrong. At first, it was subtle, a prickling sensation at the back of the neck, the kind of feeling you get when you're being watched. Then came the discoveries: animal carcasses, deer, elk, even a bear. These weren't ordinary deaths. Their bodies were shredded, innards strewn across the forest floor like grotesque offerings. Bones were shattered in ways that defied logic, as if whatever killed them didn't just hunt, but enjoyed breaking them apart. My father, a seasoned hunter, had taught me to track and read the signs of predators. None of this made sense. Whatever did this was large, powerful, and disturbingly chaotic, too messy for a cougar, too vicious for a bear. It was as if the forest itself was angry. The crew grew restless. Mutters of old stories and whispered warnings floated through the camp. My colleagues, seasoned loggers like me, weren't easily spooked, but there was something primal about their fear. Spirits, they whispered, guardians of the forest angered by our trespass. The stories they told varied: shadowy figures that moved like smoke, creatures with glowing eyes that protected sacred ground. I brushed it off, a practical man who needed tangible answers. Superstition had no place in my world, or so I thought. But when Carl, one of our crew members, went missing, practicality gave way to dread. Carl had wandered off during lunch, probably for a quick break behind a tree. We called for him, searched the immediate area, and even widened our perimeter. He was gone. No sound, no trace, not even the crunch of disturbed underbrush. The forest swallowed him whole. The search lasted until dusk, with Hank barking orders and our voices echoing through the trees, but there was nothing. When we returned to camp, an eerie stillness had settled over the site. The forest was too quiet, as if it, too, was holding its breath. The following day, Jerry disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. One moment he was smoking near the edge of the clearing, and the next, he was simply gone. This time, there were tracks, deep impressions in the mud leading into the forest. They weren't human, large, misshapen footprints with claw marks dragged through the earth. By this point, Hank decided it was time to call for help. We radioed the park rangers, reported the carcasses and disappearances, and were told a team would come in a few days. We didn't wait. The thought of staying even one more night in that forest was unbearable. That night, we packed up, determined to leave. As the truck's headlights cut through the oppressive darkness, the sense of being watched intensified. Every snap of a twig made us jump. Shadows loomed large against the trees, their shapes distorted by the headlights. The forest seemed alive, its silence suffocating. The wind carried strange sounds, low, guttural noises that could have been animals, but felt deliberate, as if something was mimicking nature. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow darting between the trees, but the movement was too fast, too deliberate. My blood ran cold. Whatever it wasn't human, and it was watching us. I gripped the edge of the seat, my knuckles white, as an eerie sense of dread settled over me. The forest outside loomed like an impenetrable wall, its towering trees casting long, claw-like shadows under the faint light of the truck's headlights. Something moved out there fast and purposeful. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Hank sat beside me, his gaze darting toward the tree line as if he could feel it too. His usual bravado seemed to falter, though he didn't say it outright. He glanced at me once more, but my focus remained fixed on the dark expanse ahead. The unease in the air was almost suffocating. Then it appeared. From the shadows, a massive figure lumbered into the beam of the headlights. Its body was grotesque, hunched unnaturally, with skin that looked like gnarled bark. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me, glowing, yellow orbs that burned like twin embers against the darkness. Hank froze, his expression a mix of disbelief and terror. Before we could process what we were seeing, the creature lunged. The truck rocked violently as it collided with the rear, its claws raking against the metal with an ear-splitting screech. My instincts kicked in, and I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The tires spun wildly, kicking up mud and gravel as the truck struggled to gain traction. Hank fumbled behind him, searching for the rifle he always carried on trips like this. In the rearview mirror, the beast kept pace, its long, spindly limbs propelling it forward in unnatural strides. It growled, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the truck's cabin and made my skin crawl. Hank's hands trembled as he finally gripped the rifle, his usual confidence shaken to its core. The narrow forest road stretched endlessly ahead, its curves treacherous in the dim light. Each twist felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Then, a narrow dirt track veered off to the left. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel, and the truck swerved onto the rough path. The vehicle jolted over rocks and potholes, the suspension groaning in protest. Branches clawed at the windows like skeletal fingers as the truck barreled through the dense underbrush. Finally, a clearing opened before us. In its center stood an old ranger station, its weathered silhouette barely discernible under the faint moonlight. Relief surged through me. I slammed the brakes, and the truck skidded to a halt. We leapt out and sprinted toward the building, throwing the door shut behind us. Hank heaved a heavy wooden table against the entrance, while I frantically searched the dimly lit room for anything we could use as a weapon. The growls outside grew louder, circling the station like a predator stalking its prey. In a back room, I stumbled upon a stack of faded ranger logs. My hands shook as I flipped through them, my eyes scanning hastily scribbled entries. They spoke of strange sightings, glowing eyes in the dark, livestock found mutilated, and people vanishing without a trace. One passage described the creature in chilling detail. It was a cryptid. The writer claimed a being that defied science, yet was deeply rooted in local lore. My stomach churned as I realized we weren't the first to encounter it. The first impact against the door shattered my thoughts. Hank shouted from the front room, rifle in hand. He fired, the crack of the shot ringing through the small cabin. The beast roared, a sound so primal it seemed to shake the walls. The next strike splintered the door, and shards of wood flew across the room as the creature forced its way inside. Adrenaline took over. I grabbed a cast iron skillet from a dusty shelf and swung it with all my might. The heavy metal connected with a sickening thud, momentarily stunning the creature. Hank lunged with a fireplace poker, jabbing at its flank. The fight was chaotic. Claws tore into walls, furniture splintered under the weight of the struggle, and every strike felt like a desperate attempt to survive. Finally, Hank drove the poker deep into its side while I delivered a crushing blow to its head. The creature collapsed in a heap, its bark-like skin appearing almost unnatural, as if it were part of the forest itself. We stood there, panting, drenched in sweat, and staring at the motionless figure. At first light, we left the ranger station, our nerves frayed and bodies aching. The creature's body remained where it had fallen, a grim testament to the night's events. We didn't touch it, didn't even look back. When we reached civilization, we gave the authorities a watered-down version of the story. They were quick to conclude it had been a rogue bear attack, eager to close the case. The forest, however, kept its secrets. To this day, the memory lingers, vivid and unrelenting. In quiet moments, when the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can still feel its gaze watching, waiting. The forest remembers, even if the world chooses to forget.